So it's my great pleasure now to introduce the Lester Breslow Distinguished Lecture. This was created 43 years ago to honor Dr. Breslow's legacy by Dr. Ray Goodman, who is here with us tonight. Dr. Goodman graduated with an MPH from our school, was founding president of the Public Health Alumni Association, one of the first alums inducted into our Hall of Fame. He's dedicated himself to community service both abroad and at home and achieved so very much, including, among many accomplishments, the creation of a branch of the Medical Reserve Corps in Los Angeles. He created fellowships at the school, and it's an extraordinary power of creating these, how they grow over time. There have been more than 100 fellowships sponsored so far by Dr. Goodman, and this has really transformed the lives of students. So please, thank you again. I'm delighted that Ray is here with us today, along with his son-in-law, Joe Oliva. So thank you, Ray and Joe, for joining us. The pressing issues affecting our global community today are largely ones that are shared around the world. You name them, and they're shared across borders. That's true of climate change. That's true of refugees and immigrant health. It's true of nutrition issues. It's true of how transportation is affecting our health. It's hard to come up with one that's not shared. But to address these, we also have to bridge many of the divides that the students spoke about. And there's nobody who's doing this in a more extraordinary way than tonight's speaker, Dr. Eric Esrailian. And better than, I'm going to give an introduction, but better than any introduction I could give is in fact the introduction the students gave. Because they talked about bridging disciplines, and Eric's resume ranges from physician to filmmaker, educator to activist, public health practitioner to philanthropist. He is bridging disciplines and bridging careers. Our students talked, and I didn't prep them for introducing you, but they talked about how fundamental this core value is that we achieve health for all in this country. And Dr. Esrailian is co-chief of the Manoukian Division of Digestive Diseases here at UCLA, Lincy Foundation Chair in Clinical Gastroenterology, and while doing everything else, is widely recognized as a truly extraordinary clinician and is mentoring a whole generation of clinicians so that we can have widely available health care. His ties to the university run deep, and there are many, but I have to say I'm particularly proud that he's one of our alums and got his MPH from the school and that he serves on our advisory board. Beyond UCLA, he's co-chair of the board of directors of the Fulfillment Fund, an organization that works with more than 2,700 under-resourced students in LA each year to help them achieve the crucial dream of college education. He serves on the board of the Hammer Museum, the X Prize Foundation, and many others, though I would say none as important as his role for us. When you mention Eric's name to people, they smile. And that's probably the best credit of all. They talk about his generosity. They talk about his candor and his commitments. And these are really shown in some of his recent ventures, which he's going to share with us. This is the transition to filmmaker. If you haven't seen his recently released film, The Promise, set during the Armenian Genocide, you should. I have, and it's transformative, even to those of us who knew about it. Going through the film is the smallest piece, of course, of reliving any of it, but the knowledge it imparts is extraordinary. Now, on the web page for the social impact campaign that accompanies the movie, it reads, "Injustice is only enabled by silence." Nothing could be truer right now with all that's going on. So at this time, above all times, it's my great honor to introduce Dr. Esrailian, this year's lecturer.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
I truly appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dean Heyman, and students, faculty. It's my honor, and I really appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to be the speaker this year. I also wanted to congratulate the student speakers. It was fantastic, very impressive, and makes me proud to be an alumnus of the school. It's great to see Dr. Fielding and Mrs. Fielding here, because Dr. Fielding was one of my professors, actually, when I was getting my MPH, and he gave me a good grade, so I really appreciate it. So I think this is going to be a little bit different than the previous Breslow lectures, and again, Dr. Breslow is a pillar in the field of public health, so it's an honor for me to be anyway associated with that name. For me, what I'd like to do, rather than show you data, which you're probably used to in public health lectures, is really tell you a series of stories. Stories are partially about me, partially about my background, and really an explanation for how things connect in my life and help me make decisions with respect to what projects I take on and what organizations I get involved with. I had an opportunity recently to speak to a group of students in a group for leadership, and they asked me, they said, how do you explain what you do? When people ask you, what do you do? How do you explain what you do? And at my core, I always feel like I'm a physician. But I thought about it for a second, and it's kind of one of those personal mission statement type exercises that I've gone through several times. And I really just thought that I help people, or at least I'll try. And if I'm not really helping people, it doesn't make sense for me to take on any project. If it's not really connected, or if it doesn't align with my values and the values of those who have taught me over the years and mentored me and been my friend and been in my kind of orbit, then it doesn't make sense for me. And the story I'm going to tell you really is a testament and credit to countless numbers of mentors, teachers, family, certainly family, but friends and advocates of mine along the way who have really paved the way for me. And everything I do makes me really think about the lessons that have been taught to me over the years, and I have I feel a sense of duty to do the same and pave the way for other people. So that's going to kind of mix into the stories that I'm going to tell you. So these two photographs are photographs of my great-grandfather. It's that gentleman there, and he's also in this photograph right there. And these are photographs from Constantinople before the Armenian Genocide. And I grew up knowing that my great-grandfather and great-grandmother survived the genocide that took place beginning in 1915, and prior to in the Ottoman Empire. And prior to the Armenian Genocide, there had already started to be really a hostile environment for Armenians living in the Ottoman Empire and other Christian minorities. And I never had an opportunity to meet my great-grandfather, but I do remember my great-grandmother. And I recalled hearing stories about not only how they survived, but that people helped them along the way. And that concept of helping our fellow human beings has always been really imparted to me and encouraged by my family. So during this journey, I couldn't help but always think about, the people who not only survived and allowed for me to be here, but about all of those people who were not able to survive and what would have become of their families and if they were able to have been helped. And it's interesting because, as Dean Heyman mentioned, the film The Promise, and I'm going to be talking about that, this gentleman right here, his name was Komitas Vartapet, the famous figure in Armenian history, was a priest and composer, and really was a legendary figure already in the Ottoman Empire in Constantinople in that period of time. And he was one of the intellectuals that was arrested on April 24th, 1915, really the night that the Armenian genocide is officially recognized as beginning. And he actually is a character in our film. And we featured him in the film because he's such an important figure. Because although he survived, he was arrested and ultimately released because he was such an influential person in Turkey that even people who were Turkish really wanted him to not perish. The entire process of watching his culture nearly become annihilated was too much for him, and he had a great deal of trouble after the genocide started. So I know we're at UCLA, and I love UCLA, and UCLA is everything a part of me. But I do want to credit my college alma mater, UC Berkeley, because I had the opportunity to attend Berkeley for my undergraduate studies, and it was really the first place, I had a world open up to me, not only in higher education, but really seeing social impact for the first time. Being in an environment where there was a tremendous exchange of ideas, diverse ideas, people really standing up for what they believed in. And I met many individuals who were the first in their families to go to college. And that's not unique to Berkeley, because we know that at UCLA that's also the scenario. But it's the first place where I formed the concept in my own head that education is a human right. And that concept has been with me throughout the years and really has a lot to do with my interest in trying to promote education, not only as a faculty member at UCLA, but working in the community. And it's just an amazing experience for me to be at UCLA as a faculty member and as an alumnus, School of Public Health here, and as a member of the Los Angeles community, trying to help make education a reality for students who might not see it for themselves yet. And that's why some of these organizations I work with are so important to me, because I feel like I've been given a tremendous opportunity. And I really started to recognize the fact that in many families that's not the case, and Berkeley was the first place where that happened. It was also the first place I was exposed to the concept of public health. I actually was a TA for a public health class at Berkeley, and I started to think about what physicians can do in the field, and not just other experts in public health, but how can a physician really make an impact? Because I was interested in medicine, I've wanted to become a doctor for as long as I could remember, but I really started to think about what does it mean to help a community and a population, and potentially the world. And that kind of exposure was invaluable to me, because I started thinking about public health as not only a field, but as a mission. And this is actually also where I started thinking about health as a human right. And that was kind of the embryonic phase. So I had the great fortune of being able to pursue my medical studies in outstanding institutions. I went to Loma Linda University School of Medicine for my medical studies. I had great mentorship by amazing physicians and scientists. And I decided to pursue a career in gastroenterology, or digestive diseases is what we call it at UCLA. And I did my residency at USC and had an opportunity to to do my fellowship at UCLA. It was always my dream because UCLA has a profound track record for excellence in our field, but also I knew that UCLA had a school of public health. And there was going to be an opportunity, if I were to do my fellowship here, to also apply to do a master's program in public health. And this is where the concept of health as a human right really became more solidified. Because again, I was back in the public university sector. I saw, again, other students who were the first in their families to go to college, but now they had taken the step of applying to graduate school and wanted to work in rural areas around the world to help people. And it impressed me so much thinking about my classmates, many of them who were not physicians but had become really scholars and experts. And UCLA and the School of Public Health really played an important role. And I started thinking at that time that a physician really could do more than just take care of the patient right in front of them. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I love the fact that we can help people one at a time. But public health allows us to also think about helping communities and populations. And I had the good fortune to really study health services organizations, which was one of the categories back in the day before we had different headings. But it was an incredible experience to be a young physician, be somebody who was still able to conduct research and educate myself with respect to public health. And it really set the stage, I think, for what I do now, which is kind of hard to describe in one subject, I guess, or in one sentence. So I talked about mentorship a little bit, and I've had incredible mentors in my life, and none of whom are more important than this gentleman here whose name is Kirk Kerkorian. And Kirk would have been 100 years old 2 days ago on June 6th. And I love this photograph of us because he was a much harder person to describe than I am. If you think I have an interesting story, it's nothing compared to Mr. Kerkorian. But on top of his legendary status as a philanthropist and businessman and real transformational leader, he was also a boxer and a pilot, and he did all sorts of interesting things. And he was really the reason for us starting down the road of making the promise. Not only was it something that was incredibly important to him, but he contributed the financial resources and was the driver from the first minute. And in moments of doubt that I had along the way, he was the one that was the steadying force and often reminded me that, hey, you're a doctor. You should be able to do this too. And one of the things that's always funny to me, and I was recently telling the story the other day, is that Kirk had been a studio owner, knew everything about the film business, and had been told over decades that Hollywood didn't care about the Armenian genocide. It was not marketable. There weren't going to be people lining up, and there wasn't going to be a demand for the film, that it would be very difficult to make. It was going to be expensive if he wanted it to be done the way he wanted it to be done. And all of these negative variables. And I joked with him a couple of times. I said, well, it's really, nobody's going to see it and nobody cares and all these things. You might as well have Eric do it because it can only go up. So the Armenian genocide is still something that is touchy for many people to discuss because there has been denial and a systematic and orchestrated denial for now 102 years by the Republic of Turkey and those who want to essentially cover up the practices and policies that lead to genocide and human rights violations around the world. And this photograph is actually, this logo is designed by a friend of mine, but this is a Uber. And I saw this decal on the Uber and I took a photograph of it because it really reminds me of how much human rights atrocities have an impact not only on those populations, but the descendants of survivors and victims even over a century later. And the Armenian genocide is now widely recognized as being the first systematic genocide of the 20th century, but there is still denial for various reasons. And that denial has basically created an environment where there is a huge lack of awareness in modern society, like in educational systems in the United States. And it's not because of lack of documentation or lack of facts. Really, the first, what I call the first alternative fact of the 20th century is the denial of the Armenian genocide. In real time, at the time, it was among the most widely reported stories and events of the early 20th century. The New York Times, Associated Press, and many other news outlets had countless stories about what was happening to the Armenian people, as well as Greeks, Assyrians, and other minorities in the Ottoman Empire. Our US ambassador to the Ottoman Empire was named Henry Morgenthau, and Henry Morgenthal's memoirs are incredibly detailed with respect to what was happening while he was the ambassador. In fact, he resigned his position because he felt that he couldn't really save these people, and he really couldn't be a part of being ambassador in that circumstance. The perpetrators of the Armenian genocide were actually also ultimately convicted and in their own country after the genocide and exiled. And basically the photo documentation and first-person testimonials and digitized recordings of people telling their stories is now thankfully preserved forever. But despite the fact that all of these things happened, the farther we got from the actual events themselves, the easier it was for denialists to try to cover up and wipe down the crime scene. So that's why I call it an alternative fact, because it's happening, things happen right before us, yet they can be denied. And just like some people think the world is flat, or some people think there isn't any evidence that the climate is changing, there are still people that deny these human rights violations around the world. And that was something that was incredibly difficult for our team, because we felt that a film that would open people's eyes to these atrocities would then be the beginning of an opportunity to not only educate people and make them aware of the Armenian genocide, but to connect the Armenian genocide to other events happening in the world today. And the parallels are frightening, because the tactics used by perpetrators of genocide and human rights violations in the world today are not futuristic. I tell people that, you think that in 2017 we would have lasers and robots and artificial intelligence at the disposal of these abusers, but unfortunately they use the same tactics of intolerance, dehumanization, accusations, fear to commit not only genocide, but other types of crimes against humanity. So in the first phase of our journey on making the film, I just wanted to do research. As a person who had been conducting research, was an academician working in a university as a physician, I really wanted to educate myself not only about the Armenian genocide, but other human rights atrocities, other genocides of the 20th century, and to also understand what had happened in the past with respect to trying to tell the story of the Armenian genocide. And that's why I put this heading of depiction. Actually, in our documentary called Intent to Destroy, we break the film into 3 chapters, if you will: death, denial, and depiction. And I wanted to understand what has been the barrier for depiction, because there had never been a Hollywood production about the Armenian genocide. And there was a famous novel written by an Austrian Jewish writer named Franz Werfel called The 40 Days of Musadah. And this was actually an international hit. It basically chronicled the story of a group of Armenians who who fled up a mountain called Musa Dağ in Turkey, which means the mountain of Moses, and were rescued by French warships. And that was actually a true story. That concept actually happened. And the roughly over 4,000 Armenians were rescued by the French Navy, and they had been driven up the mountain basically out of desperation. The Ottoman forces were charging down on them, and they knew that they were either going to die because what had been happening to the Armenians was already well known to some of them, and if they tried to basically surrender, God knows what was going to happen to them. So they sought refuge up the mountain, and they basically fought back with whatever they could: sticks, rocks, some crude weapons, and bought time until they were rescued. So Franz Werfel had heard these stories and wrote a novel that became actually something that was considered dangerous in Nazi Germany. The novel was actually banned because Hitler thought that this could give ideas to Jews to rise up again. And it's very interesting that denialists often use the fact that there had been some attempts to fight back as a justification for genocide, essentially saying, well, bad things happen in times of war. And if you look at all of the kind of denialist positions, it always goes back to, well, Armenians were rebelling, they were not loyal, they were teaming up with the Russians, there was a rebellion in an area called Van, which is where my great-grandmother was from. But all of these things are really, again, distractions and smokescreens from the fact that the government tried to annihilate the Armenian population from its borders. And Terry George, who was the filmmaker of The Promise, often says that the concept of using fighting back as a justification for genocide is ludicrous, because it's like saying that because some Jews fought back in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Holocaust was somehow justified. But these are the same types of rationalizations that are used by denialists, not just about the Armenian genocide or the Holocaust, but all of the terrible human rights violations of the 20th century. So there had been this novel, and there had been multiple attempts to make this film, The 40 Days of Musa Dağ, that were ultimately stopped by all sorts of forces, one of which was the US State Department. The government of Turkey put pressure on the US State Department, which ultimately stopped the production, at least one time that we know of, from MGM making 40 Days of Musa Dağ. And Louis B. Mayer had even envisioned Clark Gable being in the role. And ultimately that was stopped. And there had been other attempts that had been started and stopped over the years, specifically for this novel. And this was the most famous novel that was considered source material for a film. Ultimately, as part of my research, I also was able to talk to friends who had also tried to take the step of making a film. And Atem Egoyan is a Canadian filmmaker who was born in Egypt. And he made a film called Ararat in 2002, a Canadian film which I think is outstanding and actually really does try to take the genocide and make it into a story that I think people can understand and serve as a good introduction. But he also had tremendous challenges when making the film. Even though he made it in Canada, it wasn't traditional Hollywood. He was able to get fantastic actors to be in the film, but he had a very difficult time getting it out into the world. And ultimately, at its peak, it was only on 42 screens. And I still think it has held up very well to this day. But in talking to Atem, he revealed to me that he also faced tremendous pressure from people in Turkey, basically trying to discredit him, discredit the film. In our documentary, we show Atem talking about his experience, and he actually produces material that has been published basically describing him in Turkish to be a terrible filmmaker and how all of his films were bombs. And that's nothing compared to the direct intimidation that he received. So all of these different experiences were helpful to me to understand and to better chart the path for which we wanted to take for the film. And in 2012, after 2 years essentially of research and education, and basically I was getting my education. As I tell people, I worked on the film for 7 years and I went to med school for 4. But Mr. Krikorian finally said, okay, that's enough school. Now it's time for us to actually make this movie. And he wanted to form a production company that would become the vehicle for us to make the film. And we called it Survival Pictures. This is the forget-me-not flower, which is a symbol of the 100th commemoration of the Armenian Genocide. And the petals represent the different continents that people fled to, Armenians fled to in the diaspora after the genocide. And basically at that point, we started putting the pieces together to build on the research and all the relationships that we had cultivated and all of the different ideas that we had thought about. And Mr. Krikorian was very clear on what he wanted. He wanted the film to be epic. He wanted the film to be a love story. He wanted it to be kind of a throwback to the films that he remembered growing up with, like Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia and For Whom the Bell Tolls. Films that had scale, they had important subject matter, they had romance, and they had movie stars. And he actually used those words, movie stars. And that's what he remembered. And so that was really kind of the blueprint. And there were various factors that went into what we talked about. The protagonist is a medical student. Gomitas is in it. It takes place in Constantinople and villages. So there's a lot of personal experiences also from not just my family, but people I had come across and my research. And so many Armenians share similar stories. I mean, the most incredible thing to me is coming across people and hearing how similar the stories are, and not just in the Armenian community, but across different cultures who have been affected by these types of issues. So basically, to partner and start working down a real path, we joined forces with my friend Mike Medavoy, who's also a Bruin. Now, Mike has forgotten more about the entertainment business and Hollywood than I'll ever know. And he's done it all. He's been a talent agent for some of the most incredible names in the history of the film business. He's been a studio executive, and he's been an incredible producer. And he also has a real desire to tell stories of social impact. It was the perfect person to partner with. And he's been, again, one of these not only great friends, but mentors along the way. And we started saying, okay, well, now that we have these ideas and we have the vision and we have kind of the blueprint, let's get the people together to actually make the film. And we started the real journey into social impact. Because again, as a physician, I had several forces driving me, trying to help people, trying to raise awareness. And Mr. Krikorian also was the one that said, we also can donate all of the proceeds that come in to charitable organizations. Because several times, again, as I was doing the research, I said, Kirk, you're talking about movie star, scale, all these things. It's going to be pretty expensive. We could also just donate that money to charity. And he said, well, you can do both. Because when you make a film like this, it's going to live forever. And you can donate the money to charity. And if you don't make the film, then no one's going to really ever know about this story, because there's been countless books, there's been countless lectures, there's been many documentaries. People still don't know. And really our culture and what happened to it may be forgotten. So I started also studying, during this period of research, other films that had this type of subject matter and social impact. Schindler's List, The Killing Fields, Reds, and Hotel Rwanda. And we had the tremendous good fortune to be able to partner with creative individuals who not only were talented, but they're just good people. So Robin Swycord was the first person we started working with, and she's an Academy Award nominated screenwriter. And she also had a personal story because her family, the family she was married to are Greek. Her father-in-law was Elia Kazan. He made a film called America, America, which also has some depiction of the Armenian genocide, but really focuses on a Greek immigrant coming to the United States. And she also had friends that she had grown up with or that she was very close to that had been touched by the Armenian genocide. So she wrote an incredible screenplay, and we started working on that and really honing that further. And when we got to the point where it was time to start talking to directors, we always envisioned that we would talk to, or we would hire a director that was not only a filmmaker, but also a writer. And we were able to then bring on Terry George. And Terry was incredible because he's the writer and director for Hotel Rwanda, and he really understood what the mission was. After essentially fine-tuning the script, it was time to really hire our cast. And looking back, it's really difficult for me to imagine other lead actors in the role. And again, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that we had a fantastic story, we had a social impact mission, and we had a fantastic filmmaker, because we were able to get the best actors, I felt, in the world for these roles. And this is Christian Bale, Oscar Isaac, and Charlotte Laban. And I hope all of you have an opportunity to see it, because I think their performances are incredibly moving. We filmed most of the film in Spain. And it was right around the time of, and this is actually Madrid, this is City Hall in Madrid. And it was right about the time where the refugee crisis in Europe was front page news. And we have a lot of other kinds of front page news now, but this is still a problem, okay? And it really, the parallels between the film we were making and the issues that I care about as a physician and member of society were connecting. And Dean Heyman and I have talked so much about how this school can be a force in studying refugee health, because I think it's going to be one of the humanitarian catastrophes of the next several decades, unfortunately, because of what's going on. And our film was really taking place and being filmed essentially at the time where on the news we could see people fleeing certain death and getting on boats or rushing borders or being put into camps, very similar to what was happening over a century before. We had our festival premiere of the film at the Toronto International Film Festival, and soon after having our first screening in Roy Thompson Hall, there was some record of thousands of votes voting the film 1 out of 10 on a website called the Internet Movie Database. That was after the first night, and after a couple of days, we had tens of thousands of votes. So we knew actually, okay, these people haven't seen the movie, obviously. And after a little bit of investigation, it was clear that there had been orchestrated attempts from overseas to try to discredit the film. And as of now, our film has been voted on more than some of the biggest blockbusters of the last 12 months, because not only have people been voting down the film, but other people have been trying to vote up the film. And I think we revealed kind of a flaw in the rating system, but it became a big story because it was an example of how denial was alive and well, and how the modern form of denial also used technology, the internet, and social media to essentially take forms of cyberbullying to a new level. There was hate speech, threats, all sorts of things that really made the film stand out and become more of a concept that we had to actually fight for. And actually, this book was given to me by one of my former professors here, Fred Weinstein, because he always used to say, why don't Armenians make a museum? Instead of having to constantly go before Congress and try to provide evidence about their ancestors. And it was always a motivational force for me, because Elie Wiesel often has spoken about taking sides and how silence essentially helps the oppressor and never the tormented. And the IMDb attacks really reminded me of the fact that that's nothing compared to what happens to people in the real world, and what has happened to people in the Holocaust, and what happened to my ancestors. And it really gave me a lot of strength, and our team's strength, as we started charging down the road, because we felt like this is now even more important than ever. If we didn't have something important to say, if we didn't want to take sides, then the only people we would be helping are the denialists and the people who facilitate human rights violations today. So ultimately, the film was invited to some incredible venues. This is the US Capitol. We were invited to the Vatican, where we screened the film in the screening room of the Vatican, which is incredible. Essentially, it's like a church, except instead of an altar, you have a screen. And UCLA gave me the honor of being an optimist for the different things I did. And I always tell people that, I may be the first Armenian optimist at UCLA, but I'm not going to be the last, thanks to the fact that there are so many incredible students that now have been given an opportunity to go to school because of the fact that their ancestors survived. We were invited to City Hall, and Mayor Garcetti and the LA City Council gave us a commendation on April 28th. And as you may know, Los Angeles has a large Armenian American community, and this city has always embraced the impact that Armenians have had on the community, especially people like Mr. Krikorian. And when you don't have a studio, what you have to do is think of ways to really reach people. And social impact is something that means different things to different people. But to me, it means not only raising awareness, but actually doing good. So we partnered with friends that I was fortunate to be able to reach out to do different things. So this is Alex and Ani. I'm wearing the bracelet right now. Carolyn Raphaelian, who's a friend of mine, she's actually on the cover of Forbes right now. She has a concept called Charity by Design, where she donates proceeds from different pieces to charitable organizations. And this piece, actually, she's donating all of the proceeds to help Armenia. And Keep the Promise was something I thought of as a potential rallying cry as part of our social impact campaign. And so going from the pieces like this to using social media really helped us reach so many people, not just about the movie, but about the genocide and how the parallels need to be made to the human rights issues of today. So I also relied on Armenians who are more well-known than I am. So we have Cher, Kim Kardashian, and Kourtney Kardashian. And a friend of mine saw this photograph and sent it to me and said that Armenian eyes are focused on fighting genocide denial. And I always thought that that was powerful because anybody I asked to help me wanted to step up and do it. And it's incredible. So I want to just show you one quick clip to you, for you. This is an example of something we made with some friends.
I'm Christian Bale.
I'm Oscar Isaac.
I'm Terry George.
Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom.
I'm Dean Cain.
My name is Jennifer Lopez, and I vow to keep the promise.
I vow to keep the promise.
I vow to keep the promise.
Dave Bautista here, my man Roman.
Hi, I'm Andre Agassi.
I'm John Prendergast.
My name is Samantha Power.
I'm Adam McGoyan.
All of us, each and every one of us, must vow to keep the promise.
We cannot let this happen to another group of people.
Help us keep the promise.
I'm Don Cheadle.
Hey, I'm Heidi Klum.
I'm Elton John.
I'm David Furnish.
And I'm Arsene Khanjian.
I'm Chris Cornell.
I'm Barbara Streisand.
And we vow to keep the promise.
So basically, we tested this film, like again as a doctor, because we wanted to make sure that it reached people who would be in this audience or who would be at the grocery store. We wanted it to be for the masses. And we were fortunate to have audiences really respond to the film. And we were given this designation from CinemaScore, as well as other rating sites, just to give us a flavor for how does the average person who actually can go and see the film respond to it. And now we're about to enter our home entertainment phase in July. And we know that although it's difficult to compete against blockbusters in the theater like Boss Baby and Fast and the Furious and Guardians of the Galaxy, we know that this is a film that people respond to. And with home entertainment and DVDs, we really want to reach everybody in the world. I'll tell you that Mr. Krikorian would have wanted, if there was a deal that everyone in the world would see the film, but there wouldn't be any revenue, he would take that deal because it was so important to him for the story to be told. And thanks to UCLA, we were able to come up with a concept that was incredibly important to all of us, which is to take from the darkness of the Armenian genocide, all of us into the light and what we can do to help people in the world today. So we started the Promise Institute for Human Rights at the UCLA School of Law, and this institute will be hopefully something that will help generations of students and Bruins and the community learn about human rights issues. It will be an institute for scholarship, education, advocacy, and really a hub for our campus, including our School of Public Health and Medicine and Public Policy and theater, film, and television, and many others, and is an example of what we can do in terms of social impact. I just want to take a couple minutes, and also, I know we're a little bit over time, but I want to tell you about somebody who was very important to me, named Chris Cornell. He was one of my best friends, and he was one of the people that I first talked to about the film in 2010, because he was such a creative genius. He always was able to take an idea and make it into a reality. And we had just an incredible ability to laugh and talk about world issues and family. But whenever I would talk to him about the film, he was just so passionate and so excited, and he thought it was so important, and he was so encouraging. And ultimately, we talked about him doing the title song for the film. And this is actually when we recorded our title song with a live orchestra conducted by Paul Buckmaster, who's done a lot of Elton John's orchestral compositions. And here's Chris kind of observing the orchestra. And with his family, we thought of what to put on the epitaph, and we called him the voice of our generation, because he really represents that to so many people. And he unfortunately died a few weeks ago, but it's been bittersweet because he was so proud of his song. And on June 20th, World Refugees Day, we're going to release his last video, which we recorded not too long ago. And this is actually when we were working on the radio edit. And Chris was the one that said, I'm really excited about the cinematic version of the song, but I want to work on something also for radio, because he was always thinking, he was always creative, and his wheels were always turning. And ultimately, he's only performed the song twice live, and one of the times was on The Tonight Show and one time on CBS Saturday Morning. And this is the not-so-glamorous backstage room of The Tonight Show, where Chris performed. And Chris also was an incredible humanitarian and really cared about children. And because of everything that we had done with The Promise, he also wanted to donate all of the proceeds from his song to help children and refugees. And soon after we left the Vatican, he went to a refugee camp in Athens, where he met with Syrian refugees, and you can see the look on his face. He was just an incredible person. And I just wanted an opportunity just to tell you about the song. And we did a lyric video that is not the video that we're going to actually have come out on World Refugees Day, but I thought it would be a good way to close this presentation. And I'm happy to take questions afterwards. I'm just going to play this for you.
If I had nothing to my name but photographs of you rescued from the flame, that is all I would ever need, as long as I can read what's written on your face. The strength that shines behind your eyes, the hope and light that will never die. One promise you made, one promise that always remains. No matter the price, promise to survive
Thank you.
On for a long time right now, but please stay up. We'll take one or two questions. Before we do, I just want to say a word, especially when you put Elie Wiesel up there, because one of his quotes that I've always found most meaningful is that the opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. And I think your work and your whole team's work, Chris's and everyone's work, is really, and your family's dedication, which really made this possible, is really this commitment not to be indifferent, not to step back and do nothing, but to really make change happen. So we're all indebted for that. I want to open it up for questions.
And I'm happy to
comments.
afterwards stay a little bit if people want to ask.
Yeah, we'll have a reception afterwards also for more questions. I think everybody's absorbing the enormity. Jonathan.
Think of a public health component to it.
It's just overwhelming. I think that's why you're not getting many questions. People are just letting it sink in. But is there going to be opportunities to get this into schools?
Absolutely.
And I'm interested in how you see that occurring, because I don't remember, maybe my memory's not that good, but I don't remember this ever being part of the history that I learned.
Right. Well, that's actually one of the unfortunate successes of the denialist campaign, is to keep this part of world history out of history books. It's changing. In many states now in the United States have adopted resolutions to incorporate the Armenian genocide as part of their curriculum. But that's one of the things that we have an opportunity to now do with the social impact campaign, with the home entertainment, DVDs. We have a curriculum that goes along with the film that has been developed by experts. We're partnering with the Shoah Foundation at USC because the Shoah Foundation has a track record for educational curriculum accompanying these types of human rights issues. And there are many other organizations like Facing History and others that want to partner with us. We've also created a virtual reality short film with a group called Global Nomads Group. And Global Nomads Group works on educational curricula around human rights issues. So that will actually be coming out in the fall too. And that will be another part of the educational component to the whole campaign.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
I just want to say one more word before we move on, because Eric's humility and just his good soul, I think, kept him from saying this other piece too. But it's an important part of the story, which is, in addition to how tough it is to take on a whole new field, it's very tough to take on a whole new field and to take on a whole new career. There was a lot of pushback and a lot of scary pushback. And when you take on that level of, when you take on genocide, when you take on the most extreme forms of discrimination, of violence, there is a lot of pushback, and I think it's important to recognize both the ability to still move these things forward in the face of it, and also to recognize your families and everyone involved extraordinary courage in this. So thank you again.